Hello! Today's video is going to all be about migration. This one is very much an introduction to migration. It's about the key terms, the key concepts. There will be separate videos that go through the different types of migration that are on your syllabus. This is very much just the introduction, okay? Just wanted to be clear about that. What is migration? Well, it's a quite simple idea. It's people moving from one location to another. But we do have some sort of time scale to think about here. So it says there, on a semi-permanent or permanent basis. There's no hard and fast rule about this, but generally speaking, we're talking a year plus. If you go on holiday for 2 weeks, then actually you're a tourist, you're not a migrant. There is the idea that people at least are intending to stay there for a long period of time. That doesn't always happen, of course, because life changes and plans change, but they are at least planning to stay there for a reasonable length of time. Okay, tourism, so staying in places for a few weeks or something like that, it would come up in changing places, and there will be a separate video on that. There are quite a few different types of migration, but in your A-level, for our exam board, which is EDUCAS, you only learn these 3. We're going to learn about international economic migration, which is pretty obvious. It's moving to another country for economic reasons, maybe a better quality of life, or a job, or a better paying job, or those kinds of reasons. Forced migration is not very nice at all. It's moving because you fear for your life. It's not ooh, I'd quite like to live in Australia because the quality of life is brilliant, or I've been offered this amazing job in Paris, shall we go? It's, if I stay here, there's a really good chance that I might die. So it's a very, very different type of migration. And then our third type is rural to urban. So you stay in the same country, but you move from the countryside to a town or a city. Okay, again, that would be on a voluntary basis. So it's just to remember that there is a big difference between those 2 main categories. Are you moving because you have to? You don't really have a choice. It's a kind of almost life or death situation, or are you moving because you quite fancy a change, you've got itchy feet, there's an amazing job offer, that kind of thing. Okay, so the 2 big categories are forced or voluntary. Within forced migration, and there will be a separate video about this, but I wanted to introduce these terms to you now. Within forced migration, there is some really important terminology. Okay, now you, of course, can pause this to take them down. If you have a module booklet from us, these will be in there for you, so you shouldn't need to copy these word for word. Right, now refugees are recognised in international law. So that definition is actually not a geographical one, it's an international legal definition. Someone who is unable or unwilling to return owing to a well-founded fear of. So persecution is being, it's kind of bullying really on a quite intense scale. But if you've never heard of persecution, then think of it as really nasty bullying. And of course, unfortunately in the world, people do get targeted for a whole host of reasons. And if they genuinely fear for their lives because of that, then they may choose to move to another country. So refugees leave the country, all right? An internally displaced person, they are moving for exactly the same reasons, but they do not leave the country. And I always use this ridiculous example of, you know how Devon and Cornwall cannot agree on whether the jam or the cream goes on a scone first. Also, actually, how you pronounce the word scone is quite controversial. As you can clearly hear, I say scone, other people say scone. Lots of things to fall out about. Let's take a ridiculous example that there would be a war in southwest England over the cream tea, how to pronounce the word, which order the jam and cream goes on. Okay, I'm a coward, I wouldn't hang around. If I ran away to France, I would be a refugee. If I ran away to Yorkshire, I would be an internally displaced person. I have run away because I'm frightened, but it's just about whether you leave the country or not. Okay, so that's the important definition between a refugee and an IDP, internally displaced person. Asylum seeker. Now this is used in the media often quite incorrectly. In fact, you will hear the media talking about migrants as refugees. They do get very muddled up in their terminology. We don't want to do that. We are better than that. We are going to use our key terms correctly, please, ladies and gents. So an asylum seeker is somebody who is asking to stay in the country that they have run away to. Asylum means safety. So they are very literally, as it says on the screen, seeking safety. Okay, whereas technically a refugee may be able to go home at some point in the future. Okay, so forced migration has some very, very important terminology to be aware of. This is not crucial, and actually it doesn't really work much in a globalised world, but it's just a phrase that you might see. Distance decay means if you're talking about British people moving to other countries, the further you got from Britain, the fewer British people you would find who had moved out. But actually, in a globalised world where it's very easy to move around the world, and because of the internet and various other reasons, we're quite familiar with countries all over the world. Actually, to be honest with you, in you know the era that we live in, distance decay doesn't particularly work, but that's the theory. And it's just worth saying, generally economic migrants, so people who are choosing to move because of jobs or better quality of life, tend to travel further, whereas forced migrants will stop at the nearest safe place. I said, you know, if I was running away, I might go to France. Well, France is on our doorstep, isn't it? It would be very easy for me to get to France. So generally, economic migrants do travel further. Now, this is a really important one, net migration. And you may well be thinking, Nikki, why are we looking at a wage slip? That doesn't make any sense at all. Well, actually, net migration is very similar to your net pay. Okay, so if you look at Joe Bloggs' bank statement here, you can see that the employer owes Joe Bloggs £2,133. But before Joe Bloggs can get his money, he's got to pay his taxes, his national insurance, his pension, and something else. Childcare vouchers maybe, he might be buying a bike through the Cycle to Work scheme, don't know. But actually, out of his £2,133, he's got to give that to the government and various other places. So Joe Bloggs actually only gets £1,416. That is his net pay. So net is kind of what you're left with. So if we take all the people that move in to the country, immigration, I for in, and subtract the number of people that move out, emigration, E for exit, it's the number of migrants you have left. Okay, in the same way that this is the amount of money that you have left. Therefore, you can work net migration out with a very simple bit of subtraction. And here is a graph. I'm afraid it's a little bit out of date, but it's the best one that I could find. So what we have, look, is the blue line is the number of people moving in to the UK, and emigration, E for exit, I for in, remember, number of people moving out. The yellow bars represent the difference between those lines. And notice, back here in the early 1990s, there were more people moving out of the UK than moving in. So the net migration was actually a minus number, and that is perfectly possible for it to be a minus number. So net migration, immigration minus emigration. It's the number of migrants that you have left, in the same way that your net pay is the amount of money that you have left once you've paid all the things that you have to. Okay, now that brings us, apologies for my hand-drawn little blobs, to quite a useful model to help us understand migration, Lee's model. So you may well be familiar with the concept of push and pull factors, but I'm probably going to be adding a couple of new bits of stuff. Nothing difficult, don't worry. The origin is where you start, the destination is where you end up. So I am going to apply this to somewhere in the world that I would really like to live, which is Iceland. So my origin is Taunton in Somerset, my destination is Iceland. The negative signs here are the things that I don't like about Taunton, the things that are pushing me away from Taunton. So I might say it rains quite a lot. I might say there's no volcanoes in the area. I might talk about the, I don't know, the lack of opportunities, that kind of thing. It's anything that you don't like about where you live. They're the push factors. The positives at the destination are called the pull factors. They're the things that are attracting you to that place. So I've probably given myself away. One of the big things for me would be the volcanoes in Iceland. I also really like the landscape. I really like the people, the friendliness, all of those kinds of things. Okay, so that's probably what you know. But there are some positives here because there are nice things about Taunton. This is where my family live. This is where I've got a job that I really enjoy doing. I've got lots of friends here. There are going to be some nice things about where you live, in the same way that there are going to be some negatives about the place that you are thinking of moving to. Iceland is ridiculously expensive, and my chances of learning the language are, I would say, precisely nil. I struggle, you know, with basic words. So we're saying at A level, it's a much more balanced decision than push-pull. Obviously, there are more positives in the destination than there are here, and there are more negatives in the origin than here, because otherwise, why are you moving? It doesn't really make any sense. But it's a much more balanced thing. Now, I've added in my beautiful drawing, some neutrals. Now, there will be some types of migration that don't really have neutral factors, but they are things that would be the same in both places. So I could say, well, actually, everybody in Iceland speaks English, so I could have English-speaking people as a neutral factor in both places, for example. I could argue that in both cases I would still be in the continent of Europe, for example. Okay, so they're often quite hard to think about, but there may well be some things that are the same in both places. And then finally, we have these little intervening obstacles. What on earth are they? Well, they are things that might stop you moving. I might not be able to afford to move to Iceland. That's true. I can't afford to move to Iceland. My husband and my son might decide they don't want to move to Iceland, in which case I'm not going to move away from them. Okay, so intervening obstacles are things that might stop you. It might be not being able to get a visa. You might not be allowed in. It might be COVID. That's absolutely possible. You know, a global pandemic has rather put the dampeners on people moving around very much. So it could be COVID restrictions, could be anything, but it's something that stops you moving. Now, if you have a Hewish module booklet, there will be a table where you have a go at using these terminologies for somewhere that you would like to live in the future. So it would be a good idea, either in your own time or in class, you have to ask your teacher which they would rather, having a practice of thinking about these push and pull factors, these neutral factors, etc. Okay, but that is your introduction to migration. If my computer's going to work.